Welcome to another edition of the Monday Morning Tennis Rant, where I talk about what happened in the previous week in the tennis world. I'm going to start off with something controversial. Nick Kyrgios on the Impaulsive podcast was asked the question how players like Pete Sampras, Andrew Agassi, and John McEnroe would fare against today's players. And Nick said that they would get absolutely snipped. I'm not familiar with the word snip, but I think he's saying that they're going to get destroyed. And I do agree that John McEnroe with his classic game would have a hard time in today's game, but I'm going to disagree with Sampras and Agassi. Why? Because they didn't play so long ago. In fact, Agassi was still on tour and was playing against guys like Rafa, and he was doing quite well. And Pete Sampras' game, even though his technique might have some classic elements to it, the serve alone would allow him to compete with players today. In my opinion, Pete Sampras had the best hold game in the history of tennis, and he was one of the best athletes to ever play the game. He was so physical the way he finished points off, and all Sampras really needed was one break, which made the fact that he has a little bit of a weakness on the backhand side irrelevant. He would get one good break game and then he would hold serve for the rest of the set. And the scoreline of Sampras throughout his career was like 3-3, 4-4. All Sampras needed was one break. It's not fair to do these comparisons because if Sampras played tennis today at his older age, of course he couldn't compete on today's tour. So we're talking about a Sampras in his prime, and these type of comparisons are tough. But if you want to make them, because people like to bring this stuff up, in my opinion, I do think an in prime Sampras will do really well on tour, except against Djokovic, Nadal, and Alcaraz. I do think that he would have a hard time. I do think those guys would exploit his backhand, but against everybody else, I do think that Sampras would have a pretty good chance. And now let's talk about what happened on the ATP Tour in the previous week. And I made an Instagram post a couple of weeks ago where I was praising Norrie for going to South America to play the clay court swing. And guess what happened? Norrie is an absolute grinder. See, a lot of people don't really like Norrie that much. I get a lot of messages, people asking me to comment on Norrie's technique, especially his backhand. But I can tell you that Norrie is an absolute machine, a grinder, and what he did in the last 2 weeks is spectacular. Made the final in Buenos Aires, I talked about that last week, lost to Alcaraz. And now this week he comes back, faces Alcaraz again, and beats him on clay in a 500 final. Now you would think that this is Norrie's biggest win. No, Norrie won Indian Wells a few years back. So this is a high caliber player. Maybe not the most exciting player to watch, maybe not the most spectacular shots, but I appreciate a guy like this so much, who's a grinder, a hard worker, and who wins matches by grinding them out often in 3 sets, 7-5, 7-6 in the third. So I got a tremendous amount of respect for Camilla and Norrie. Now last week I talked about how Medvdev was back in form, and he confirms this form by winning the second title in a row in Doha against Andy Murray, which is amazing. Andy Murray is doing so well. And there was an indoor tournament in Marseille. Hubert won another title. I do think he's going to have a great career, especially on fast surfaces. He's one of those tall guys that also moves exceptionally well, and you're going to see a lot more titles coming from him. But now let's move on to the women, where something spectacular happened, something that doesn't happen very often. And Barbora Krejcikova beat Iga in the final of Dubai, which came as a surprise to everybody because Iga is on absolute fire right now. She's definitely back. She's destroying everyone. But Barbora got her in the final, and she is an unbelievable player. Not only one of the best doubles players in the world, but she's a French Open champion. And the players that she beat in Dubai, absolutely outstanding. She beat 5 top 10 players, and she beat the number 1, 2, and 3 player in the world. So Barbora is a great player. No, she's not a one slam wonder. A lot of people online like to troll female players. There was a tournament in Mexico where Sloane Stephens got beaten 6-0, 6-0 by Camilla, who won the tournament. And you should read some of the comments about Sloane. It's so mean. They're telling Sloane to retire. And I feel like a lot of these comments are directed at females for whatever the reason may be. And I read some of those comments about Barbora as well after she failed to capitalize on her French Open success. So I'm happy to see that she's continuing to take big titles. This was a 1,000 that she won in Dubai, and she can definitely take more slam titles, not only doubles, but also in singles. So guys, that's it for this week's Monday Morning Rant. I'm going to see you next Monday, and I wish everybody a good week.